Welcome to First Baptist Church in Sweetwater, Texas. This summer, we will be discussing the book of Romans. Join us today as our pastor, Jerry Hendricks, leads our conversation.
You know, I love being a parent, and I had looked forward to that for a long time in my life. And so when I met Sharon, one of the things that we talked about as we were getting to know one another is we talked about children and family and the way that we wanted our children to be brought up and the things that we would teach them. And we talked as just as partners on how we would want to do that and to view that in our life. Having and being a parent, getting to be a parent was a priority in my life. It was something that I look forward to and something that I enjoy even until this day with my adult children. But in that process, there are things that happen, and you know this if you are a parent or if you remember well enough as a child. There are events that happen along the way that are just unpredictable. When James was 4 years old, I may have lost him. I had hoped that it was temporary, but as the anxiety grew, I was fearful that it was not going to be temporary. I could not find it. And you know, the last thing you're going to do is to call your spouse and say, hey, I think I lost our oldest child. We had a pattern when James was young. He enjoyed hanging out with me, and when he was about 4 years old, he was going through a pattern where he would go to the church with me on Sunday mornings, and I would get there early, about the time that I would normally get to work. It was about an hour and 15 minutes before anyone else had gotten there. And in this particular church building, none of the buildings were really attached. Our worship center was a separate building than our education building. The offices were separate from the education building, and then the youth building was above the gym on the other side, on the far east side of our campus. And so when I would get there, I would go back to the copy room or do those kinds of things that a staff person does. And if you want to know what they do, get here early on a Sunday and go into the office, and you'll kind of see the mix that's going on there and things that we're doing. And so I'd go through this routine, but I had learned that I kind of had a pattern, because you want to have a pattern when you have that many buildings that you're going to be in on a given Sunday. And it was on the coast, and you're hot and sweaty already, and you're just getting started. And so you're starting the day just in kind of a bit of a fit anyway. And so this little guy, he would just follow me around. And somewhere on this particular day, I turned and he wasn't there. Now let me retrace my steps. I'd gone and first thing we do is we unlock the office, we go into the education building, I open my office, we go in there, I go to the copy room, which is at the back, and then I leave from there to go to the youth building, which is on the far east side of the campus. I think that's where I lost it. Because on the way back, what I would normally do is I would come back from the youth building on the far east side to the far north or south side to hit the worship center, do a couple of things there, and then come back to my office if I didn't see someone that I would start talking to. And oftentimes I would stop by the educational building where we had a library and they had coffee, and I would go in there and visit with those folks because they were also early arrivers. At some point I realized that he's not toddling along behind me, and I've lost him. So what I do is I completely retrace my steps. I go from the worship center back to the youth education building, back to the library. And you don't want to walk into the library where there's some nice people in there and say, hey, have y'all seen my kid? Because that's just an admission of guilt, okay? I mean, they've been there. They know. So I get back to my office. I go into my office and I pull back. I'm looking everywhere, and I can't find him. In fact, I think, this is the only part that I don't remember real well, I think that I even took this big oversized desk chair that I had and rolled it back, and I think I looked under my desk. I looked everywhere. Couldn't find him. I thought of calling Sharon, but I decided not to, and I made one more trip. I go, let me go back around this again, and let me see if, and I'm watching for the landscape. I'm trying to see if I can see him out there, just wandering around, because we've been doing this for some time now. He knew his way around the buildings, but I had no idea what building he might be in. I completely redo my route, come back, he's gone. I come into my office, and I'm in a panic. Now, most of the time when you lose your children, and I know that's happened, you lose them in a crowd. Or you're getting in the car and maybe you forget one. Sounds silly, it happens. And if you're that child, for all parents, we apologize. I went back, I come into my office, and there that kid was, cowered underneath my desk. Now, I'm having flashbacks now, but after the relief. Because I thought, I could just promise that I had looked underneath that desk. He was hiding there, and he came out, and he wasn't trying to be funny, or he wasn't playing a game with me, but I just want you to know, that morning, that separation was terrifying for me. Separation is terrifying. In your life, as you think about maybe instances that you've experienced, moments of separation, separation can be terrifying unless that's all you've ever known. You see, when Paul writes to the Roman citizens, and he talks to the believers who are there, I believe that he's talking to a group of people that all they've ever known in their life is separation. And so when you start talking to them about their relationship to God, it's one that is influenced by the separation that they have in knowing who their God is. You see, Paul was trying to help them to develop a new worldview. When you read in Romans chapter 8 and you look at those first 1 through 25, somewhere in there, what you begin to capture in their experience is that Paul's trying to describe for them a God that is no longer separated from them. They're not moving into an experience like their past, where the only way that they were able to draw near to God was through a prophet or through sacrifice. What he's trying to say to them is this, and the picture that he wants to paint for them is this, that in your life moving forward, because of the events of Christ, because of what God has done in providing for us His very best, His Son Jesus Christ, there will no longer be separation in your life from God. Except, what if that's all you've ever known? What does that really mean to you in that particular circumstance, in that particular situation? So we're trying to help these new believers transfer in their experience what it was like to live for God, to follow God, and to know God in a prophet sacrifice kind of religion, to one where they would understand that God has come close. God has provided His best through the life, death, and resurrection of His Son, Jesus Christ. In other words, He has provided for them the very best thing that He could have ever provided in order for them to understand what their relationship to Him would be like from that point forward. And so, in describing this, Paul uses this language that when we read it, it's a bit hard for us to understand. But it's sort of like this separatist language where we yearn for God. We groan. We have these groanings, these urgings, and when we read those words and we understand them, what we know is that it comes from deep within a person's soul, deep within who they are. And even though that's all they've ever known, they also know now that there's something that has been missing. You see, in their mind, there were two periods of life for them. And they referred to them in this way. There was the present age. That was the age that they lived in. And in their understanding, the age that they lived in was wholly bad. It was corrupt. It was all about sin, death, and decay. So from their perspective, as they looked around life, as they went to work each day, as they engaged with other people, as they tried to in whatever way were engaging God, what they understood very clearly in their experience is that life was really, as they knew it, was very bad. It was sinful. It was decaying. It was something that would be one day no more. And that's not so bad when you have this other mindset that they also carried forward with them. You see, while they understood that the present age that they lived in was bad and corrupt and decaying, they also believed and lived for, thought about, talked about, conveyed in the way that they lived their life. They knew that there was an age to come. That's what they were waiting for. That's what they wanted to experience. And so when Jesus comes and lives among them and they begun to understand him, what their hope was that that age had begun to evolve in their life at that moment. And it had. Just not in the ways that they had expected it. So Paul wants to help them understand. He wants to help us understand that this life that we live does not have to be a life of separation. In fact, because of Christ, it's not intended to be a life of separation. There's nothing about our life, whether it's the sin in our life, whether it's the bad that we see in the world, or what we believe about the future, the present future of the world, is this. It is not something that God cannot overcome through relationship. He offers us life. He demonstrated that life in their presence and for us in our presence. And he wants us to know that life and to experience that life to the greatest degree. He needs for us, I think, this morning to gain our own understanding of what this worldview ought to be like. And maybe we find ourselves in those places where we're yearning for God in those kinds of ways where we realize that we're desperate for him. You see, there are circumstances that lead towards desperation. But sometimes it's more than just circumstances, it's a way of life. And his assurance to them and to us is this, that God is here for us. God is here for us. And when we acknowledge that, there's something that changes within us where that yearning is no longer there in the same way, but we know that when we engage with him, we are drawn to him. We no longer have to wait. We no longer have to dream about what that lack of separation might look like or feel like or be like, because we are invited into this life that he gives to us. Another thing that he says is this. He tries to create for them a picture of this new world or this new life. You see, this was the one that they were looking forward to. They may not have understood it because they weren't living in that yet, but they wanted to understand it, and they were trying to grasp it in their own life and own mind and experience. And so he begins to paint a picture, and he does this through creation. And what he's trying to say to them is that God, as your creator, has created you in a way where you are a part of him as a result of creation. We're a part of God. I mean, we go back to Genesis and we read the beginning of how all of this got started when it says that God created. And he created us in his image. And as he created us, we were created to be the kind of people who would live as his creation. And so in this life to come, what Paul wants us to know is this, is that the creation is reunited with its creator. The picture of that is Jesus, as we examine his life and his experience. And the invitation for us is to live in that kind of experience. It's a theme that's repeated over and over in the verses that we've read in a variety of kinds of ways. But it's at the heart of what Paul is trying to get across to us as we learn how to live in this new world, in this new kind of way, and experience God on a personal kind of way. We're united with God in the present day. We're no longer just sitting back waiting through the difficult times of the current age, but we're united with God in the present day, in the now kind of experience. He offers us life now and everlasting. You've probably thought of this before or had this occur in your experience, but a lot of times there were generations in our church life, in our church world, where we sang about heaven, we talked a lot about heaven. In fact, it was so much the conversation and a part of worship that it was almost like we forgot that we have to live here now. That it's not just about the forever, it's about the now. And if we can learn anything from his life, we ought to begin to understand that the life that he offers us starts now. It starts where we are. You know what really can separate you from God's love? You think that your own sin can separate you? He took care of that. What about your behavior? Maybe you just say, you know, I'm not really, I believe in my heart, but I've not really made any life changes in my life. Do you think that your behavior can separate you from God? Paul says that can't separate you. And it's not because of what you can do, but it's because of what God has overcome for us, so that we can live the life that he intended for us to have now and forever. We don't have to wait to know what that life with God is like. And that's the picture. The picture is that life forever is life with God, but life here in the present age is waiting for that moment. No, it's now, and it's here. So Paul says in Romans chapter 8, the verses that I wanted for us to think about today, starting in verse 31. Finally, he comes to this proposal. And here's the way he wants us to think about it. He said all of these other things, and he's talked about the flesh, he's talked about the spirit, he's talked about life, and trying to help them gain an understanding of this new walk with God that they might have. And so here he kind of sets the stage for something different. He's saying, take all of this that I've been discussing with you and we've been working through, and ask yourself this. What then shall we say in response to these things? Now, before we read on, here's one of the things that I want you to think about this morning. When God speaks to us, there is a need to respond. When God speaks to you, it wasn't an accident. When you begin to hear God, God is anticipating a response. Now, you know that response can go one of several ways. And sometimes in our own nature, we take on that nature. We want to take on that nature of God. It's yes, no, or wait. It's yes, God. And we're full on with what God has asked us to respond to. Or no, I can't do that. I'm not ready. Moses tried to throw up those kinds of rejections. I'm not ready. I can't even speak. Or maybe, and possibly that's the worst of all, that waiting, that continually putting God off in this response. So Paul is suggesting and helping us to understand this by right off the bat saying, how is it that we're going to respond to this new kind of life, this new way of life? If God is for us, who can be against us? He who did not spare his own son, but gave him up for us all, how will he not also, along with him, graciously give us all things? What Paul is helping them understand is that God was going to demonstrate his love to them by not holding anything back. There's nothing more that God could do to show us his love than to provide a son for our world to watch, to bump up against, to live with, to know, and to do that as a sacrifice for our sin, and through the resurrection show us life. Who will bring any charge against those whom God has chosen? It is God who justifies. Who then is the one who condemns? No one. Jesus Christ, who died, more than that, who was raised to life, is at the right hand of God and is also interceding for us. Also interceding for us. And when you begin to break that down, and you've probably talked about this maybe in some of the lessons in your life if you've been a part of church for a while, that we have no excuses. If we think that we come to a relationship with God and we don't know how to describe it or how to best live it, Jesus Christ intercedes for us at those moments. If you take every excuse that you've ever had for not responding to God and you were to list them, what Jesus or Paul will be saying to us is, God has eliminated all of those. The only thing left is for us to say yes. God is waiting for me and for you to respond with the yes. Then he says, he gives some examples. He kind of describes this. He creates the list for them if they did not already have that in their own mind and in their own experience. He says, who shall separate us from the love of Christ? Well, think about that. Let your mind turn just a bit with that. Who is going to separate you from that love? Shall trouble or hardship or persecution or famine or nakedness or danger or sword? If you were homeless and you had nothing and nowhere to go, you couldn't even clothe yourself, do you think that would separate you from God's love? As it is written, for your sake we face death all day long. We are considered as sheep to be slaughtered. No, in all these things we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. For I'm convinced that neither death nor life, neither angels nor demons, neither the present age, nor the powers, neither height nor depth nor anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God that is in Jesus Christ our Lord. Are you separated from God this morning? Have you let life take a direction for you or for your family that is off course? Do you find yourself this morning knowing that you need to respond to God, and you know that you need to respond to God in the affirmative with a yes? Some last things that we ought to take away from this are these. First and foremost, know God. Know in your own experience who God is, and know that there's no longer anything that separates you from who he is. Because here's the reality. God knows you. You see, we may not know ourselves, but our Creator knows us. We may not understand this life that he provides for us, this forever kind of life, but he does. And so while we're struggling to know God, what we understand at the very outset is that God knows us. And if God knows us, then we lean into the things that we do not understand. And through faith, we begin to trust God. And even if the yes is not on our lips and it's not in our heart and our emotions and our life yet, we know that we're moving towards him. I heard someone say this one time, and it meant so much to me. regardless of where we are in life, put yourself in a position to be found by God. I've known people who've tried their very best to run from God. They tried to create intentionally as much separation between their life and God as they possibly could. A lot of them, in my experience, were teenagers that I knew. And in that process, I tried not to panic. I tried not to worry about the separation. But what I said to them is this: put yourself in a position to be found by God. Maybe that's all we need to do today, is to find ourselves in that place, because God already knows where we are. God knows who we are. This morning, I don't want you to be terrified about the separation that might exist in your life. But I want you to embrace the fact that God has overcome any separation that we may have conjured up in our own mind, our own experience. And all we do now is respond. We say yes. You don't have to know all the answers yet. You don't have to know how it plays out. All we need to know is the yes on our heart and on our lips. Would you stand and let me lead us in prayer?
Thank you for joining us at First Baptist Church. We hope you can join us again, online or in person, in Sweetwater, Texas, as we learn to live out God's calling in the world around us.